Good evening, everyone. It is Saturday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. I am Chris Weaven. This is Starfleet Tactical, but you all knew that because that's why you're here. And Peter Gold also knew that because that's why he's here. So, hi, Peter. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good.
Good to hear it. Good to hear it. Let's see. All right. My mouse is now working. I was having some mouse issues right before we went on the air. And I think it's the mouse. I don't think it's the new computer. I've been telling you folks that I was going to go to the new computer for a while now. I have finally gone to the new computer, and I'm finally using it. So it only took me 4 months to start using the new computer. So, so Peter, you're just hanging around on vacation, right?
Correct.
So.
Yeah. Another few months.
So do you have another contract set up? Do you know where you're going next?
Return to the same ship.
Okay.
Or I should be.
So you're relieving your relief.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're hoping to get onto a fairly close to 4 months on, 4 months off rotation at this point.
Okay. So those who have not been to sea should not think of the experience for crew as being like a cruise ship by any stretch of the imagination. You also shouldn't overly internalize what we see in Star Trek, where they seem to have lots of time where they're just off in their quarters and painting and practicing their trombone and all that other stuff, because that's not how it works. On either the civilian side or the military side, you work some pretty long hours, and you pretty much work 7 days a week. So what's your typical work day, Peter?
Start at 5:30 and finish up around 8:30.
Okay. That's about what I expected it would be. And that's pretty much 7 days a week?
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So it's not really the case that Peter has 4 months of vacation. It's just that he's now doing the nights and weekends portion of his life. He just gets to have all of his nights and weekends strung together for a while.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah, it's I knew a guy who lieutenant commander in the United States Navy who during his carrier deployment, he read one novel over the course of 8 months. It took him all 8 months to finish one novel, because that's how little downtime he actually had. So, yeah. But we're going to talk a little bit more about merchant marine stuff and things like that. In fact, I made the comment at the end of the show last time that Peter and I had sort of talked about what we could talk about. We hadn't actually gone to any of those notes and talked about those things. We talked about other stuff. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we did not talk about, which was a little bit about cargo handling and a little bit about choke points and things like that. But before we do that, let me go ahead and follow the tradition. Well, first, let me follow the first tradition of showing the T-shirt, because I've been told I should always show the T-shirt. That says Defense Nuclear Weapons School, which I do not believe actually still has that title. And I don't know if they still have that seal. Can you all see the seal?
Mostly.
Okay, because I of course am facing away from the camera. I have no idea what you could and couldn't see. So that's actually sort of like one of those rubberized seals, which means that this shirt is not actually particularly comfortable if you're leaning back on it, because you end up with this big spot that in your back that sort of feels weird. But it is a nifty shirt, and I can't even remember how I got this shirt. Somebody gave it to me. I've never been to the Defense Nuclear School, Nuclear Weapons School. So, okay, let me go ahead and throw up the schedule. It's pretty much what you all saw previously. No show next week. I'm going to be at a science fiction convention, rooming with Peter, as a matter of fact, and Tom Pope. And the week after that, I'm going to be having dinner with old friends in Virginia. And so basically, I'm going to Virginia on Thursday, and I'm staying there for a while. And then for the rest of May and June, reply hazy, try again later. My guess is the 10th of May, there probably will be a show. If I had to hazard, I'd say we're probably going to have shows in May. June's going to get dodgy. The only reason I don't put it down there is because I'm moving and I'm buying a house and I have to move my stuff. And, luckily I don't have to like drive to Virginia to close on a house. Like you used to have to do that stuff. I can do all this stuff remotely, but it's still a case of I don't control my schedule for, and basically between now and mid-July, I only have vague control over my schedule. So I will let y'all know. I'll try to sort of predict things a week in advance, but right now my guess is probably on the 10th of May, but don't hold me to it. In the queue, we've got a few things there, like Franz Joseph Designs. I'm going to try to do have a show on those sorts of things. I want to try to do that when Pat's available. So basically, I'm going to throw that show together or put together my notes for it, and then hold it in reserve until Pat's available. I want to do a thing on replicators and post-scarcity economics. There's the Andy Presby at some point will come back and do a Star Trek Power Systems talk. That's almost certainly going to be a two-parter. And then at some point I need to get into the navies of Traveler. To be honest, I haven't really started reading through that stuff, and that's going to take a little while to wrap my arms around. That's going to be a pretty big thing. So with that, let me pull that down, and Peter and I can talk about things like choke points and cargo handling and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about choke points, because there's been a few times in the past where I've talked about how the assumptions of your background make a lot of difference in how things work out. In the assumptions of if you're doing science fiction that has a FTL drive of some sort, that really, really makes a difference. And that's entirely where the choke points things comes up in space travel. Star Trek, for all practical purpose, doesn't really have them. When they do have choke points, they're sort of unusual.
Cardassian wormhole.
Yeah. There are things like wormholes, and every now and then you've got a nebula that for some strange reason there's only one path through or something like that. But they're really kind of unusual in that regard. But I actually kind of like universes with geography involved. And one of the ones that Peter and I have talked about a little bit in the past is the Codominium universe from Jerry Purnell's and Larry Niven's Mote in God's Eye, which is really Purnell's universe, because he had written several novels in that universe and wrote several more later. So,
yeah, that's the Alderson drive, where to go FTL drive is a jump, but you only can jump from specific points in one star system, and from that specific point you can go to a specific point in another star system,
and they're persistent. So it's you can have a map and you can say, in order to get from here, in order to get to Alpha Centauri, you have to go to Tau Ceti and do the jump from Tau Ceti to Alpha Centauri.
Yes.
And if you're lucky, you've got more than one of those points in a system, and you've got some geography, or you've got some ability to move it along. And if not, you just sort of plug along. They call them tram lines. So you plug along the tram line.
Which works very well as a metaphor or naming. If you look at an old subway system map.
Yes. And I remember having a conversation with Winchell Chung and getting across to him the idea that it's more than just being able to link stuff together. Subway system maps are highly stylized, and they largely ignore the geographic information of what's going on the surface. It's really about the relationship of stations to each other.
Yes. Yeah, the map men have a let's see if I can find it.
The Map Men?
Yes, it's a YouTube channel.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
No,
I'm actually
I'm
going to bring up the, oh, come on. Just give me the damn image and quit taking me to the actual website. I don't want the actual website. I want the image.
Yeah.
Let me save this real quick. Actually, let me just open it in a tab, I think. And let's see if I can figure out how to share it from a tab.
All right, there's the video on the British or the London subway.
Okay.
So it's in the chat. But yeah, I mean,
it's not showing up in the chat. Put it in the private chat and I'll post it into the chat from here. We may have it set up to prevent video links from going directly or URLs from going directly into the chat.
Okay.
I had forgotten that was a feature. I discovered at recently that's a feature that you can turn on. So let me take it and put it in real quick. Oh, looks like Lissa's done playing with her cat and she's on the
Okay.
Look, Esri demands attention.
She did.
She jumped in my lap and was like, "Excuse me, you've been gone most of the day."
It was really cute. And so the way that the StreamYard interface works is that I, as somebody who's got an admin login, can actually see all the different things. I don't think, Peter, you can't see Lissa when she's not on the screen, can you?
Correct.
Yeah, so I could see her even though she had her camera turned on, but she was not on the screen, and as a result, I could see the cat jump on her and all the.
She does this all the time.
Yeah. Well,
all the time.
Buddy used to do it too. Buddy always.
And then Chandra, her spot is here. She gets in on the pillow and she'll lounge over the back.
Yeah.
So they totally redid the Washington Metro map, and I'm trying to figure out how to actually show it. And one of the drawbacks of using a new computer is I'm constantly running into places where it is wanting me to
new UI. Who dis?
Yeah, it keeps wanting me to give it permission to do stuff. That it's like, why do I need to give you permission to do that? Why can't you just do that? Okay, let me throw it up here real quick. And this is not as big as I would like it to be. Let me see if I can muck with that a little bit. Oh yeah, I can adjust the other thing. The thing that's notable about this, like when you look out on the silver line out there, and you look on all these lines and you see the metro stations that are nicely spaced apart. Yeah, that's a lie. That's a total and complete lie. Those stations are not uniformly spaced apart like that. There's many places where there's like 3 stations that are 3/4 of a mile apart, and then the next station's like 2 miles away, but it looks like 4 stations that are just boom, 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 boom. And that's because a map like this is really more about providing you with an understanding of the relationship with regard to the metro between the various points, not any relationship about how you would get from one metro station to the other on the surface. So it is a lie. It is a useful lie. All models are wrong. Some models are useful. This is a model of the way the world works that is useful as long as you are in the metro system and not trying to do it from outside the metro system. And so that's actually one of the reasons I like things like Alderson points, etc., is that I can, you give me something that looks like that metro map and you tell me, okay, as a military guy, how would you go about, conducting a campaign on that? I've got geography. I know how to do it. It's, I know what the equivalent of a river valley looks like, right? There's a reason why battles occur in the places that they do. And a lot of it is geography, and that gives you geography. So, are you familiar with the Starfire universe at all? Have you read any of those?
That's David Weber and company.
Yeah, David Weber and Steve White did the first novels, but they actually, it started out as a game, and it has something that looks a lot like Alderson Points.
Yeah, I read the first couple of books that David and Steve did.
Yeah, I can't remember if they ever say in the books what exactly determines where warp points are and how big they are and stuff like that. I know that in the Parnell books, it's something involving luminosity. It's actually not the size of the star per se. There's some other variables in there, and which sort of surprised me that it wasn't just the mass of the star.
Dan Alderson actually created the math to do it for what we knew about all the different stars at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if he had to invent 2 new nuclear forces.
Only 2?
Yeah, only 2. And then actually lets you map out all the stars that we knew about when he did it and how they work. I have no idea how accurate the later books are in that regard, because now
Dan Alderson, Peter's making it sound like the Alderson Drive is named after a real person, and that's because the Alderson Drive is named after a real person. Dan Alderson was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And was a real physicist who died relatively young. And that's because, if I remember correctly, he was diabetic. And if I remember correctly, the diabetic character in
Lucifer's
Hammer is Dan Alderson. Is basically a Tuckerization of Dan Alderson.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I can't remember where I read that. Next time I talk with Phil Parnell, I'll ask him.
Well, we'll ask him this weekend.
Ask him this weekend. I will have multiple opportunities to talk to Phil Parnell going forward, starting at about the same time I start my new job. What a coincidence.
Yeah. So you've got choke points in the Co-Dominion universe. You don't have choke points in the Honorverse, realistically. You got the wormholes,
with the exception of the wormhole junctions. Yeah.
And there's like 20 or 30 of them in the galaxy. They're not that many.
There's not that many, and most of them are point to point. And the Manticore wormhole junction is unique for its size. The number of points that it's got coming off of it. It's really sort of an interesting thing in that regard. Another novel that has the same sort of idea is another couple of novels is the Antares series by Michael McCollum, which I think are actually really, really good books. I really like that series. And the first 2 were published by Del Rey. The third one you can only get through Amazon or Sci-Fi Arizona, which is McCollum's website. And that series is based upon the premise that when Antares went supernova, it disrupted basically the tram lines, or whatever they called them. I can't remember. Fold points. It disrupted the fold lines between the various star systems. And then once the shock wave, which is moving at the speed of light, passes that location, the points came back. Now they're not quite in the same space they were before, because the geometry underlying the universe has changed a little bit. So this isolated colony world on sort of out in the ass end of space discovers that it's now back involved, and human space is involved in a war with a sentient alien species, which there had been no aliens discovered 200 years previously when Antares blew up, or 180 years or whatever it was. And so they have to get back, and they know something that the other folks don't. And this is a spoiler for chapter 1. I don't feel bad about spoilers for chapter 1. They discover that the fold space node is back when when an Earth battleship comes through it from Antares. And there's nobody alive on board because they've clearly been in a battle, and they clearly took a lot of radiation damage that killed anybody who had survived the battle, because they went through the remnant of a supernova, a system that had the remnant of a supernova in it. But they actually discovered that is back open again, and that potentially has some real serious strategic ramifications later on. So that's also a network where they have basically a topology map of, like you would have for a metro system, and that's how they sort of think about their strategic problems. And they make a special point of saying that, some of those lines can be really long, and you can have two empires that are basically interpenetrated but don't overlap because they don't share systems. Which you've added choke points to it like you have in the real world, but there's nothing in the real world that I think really sort of, maybe a little bit when you start getting in places like Indonesia where, one island might be owned by one country and the next island over might be owned by somebody else. That's the closest I can think of in the real world.
Yeah, I can't think of any place where the islands are intermingled.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Borneo is the weirdest place on planet Earth, by the way. Yeah. And the reason why is it's not that it's an island that's split up between multiple powers, because there's lots of islands that, I don't know, Scotland and England, right? Yeah. And there's Northern Ireland and Ireland, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. There's lots of islands that are split between more than one polity. What makes this one weird is that 2 out of the 3 polities on the island are multi-island polities. So Malaysia has a lot of different islands, and Indonesia has a lot of different islands, and they share this island. And then you've got Brunei, which is just sort of like over in the corner.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then places that Solar Clipper doesn't have it, even despite having a jump drive, because you can jump to any place.
You can create that with a jump drive if you limit how far you can jump. Traveler, in effect, kind of has that, because if you've got if you only have enough fuel to do a jump of a certain distance, that really sort of determines where the next star, it limits your options. It limits your options. And we sort of see that in things like Albedo and Outsider, etc., where there are parts of the galaxy where you just don't have very many options. You have to go there, because then from there you can go to the next place. So there's a little bit of that. But,
yeah. I mean, you could build a starship that's not going to impact, but you're not going to get the economies that you do with the existing, with the state.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they spend a lot of time talking about in Traveler, is that you can carry drop tanks, but that's a bunch of extra mass, and that merchant ships don't carry drop tanks.
Right.
if for no other reason than if you drop them, you've left them behind, and that's an expense. And even if you don't drop them, they're, the more mass you take with you, the less you have for cargo.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So as a merchant mariner who's been through a lot of choke points, I assume.
Let's see, Malacca, Suez,
Gibraltar,
multiple times.
Yeah. Panama Canal.
Yeah, Panama Canal, a couple of 4 or 5 times, I think.
What's your least favorite choke point? Because I assume that the reason why it would be a least favorite is that it's a pain in the ass to deal with because of traffic and things like that. Although you're below deck, you don't see any of that shit, do you?
Correct. Probably it was the Panama Canal, but we only had 2 engineering officers, and they wanted one or both of us. One of us had to be down there during the entire transit, and because we were small, we had to go through during the overnight.
Yeah, so it screwed up everybody's sleep schedule.
Yeah, for a couple of days. So
yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, I lucked out. I had good crew usually, so it was, okay, guys, I'm going to bed. So's the chief, and here's what you guys can do today.
Yeah, it's people think that normally a ship would be a 24/7 shop, and the answer is parts of it are just like a city. Parts of it are 24/7, but there's a lot of it that actually is a daytime sort of daytime hour operation.
Yeah.
Aircraft carriers will do flight deck on aircraft carrier is a 12-hour op. You basically can't do 24-hour ops on an aircraft carrier. Because you don't have the deck crew to do it. They've done experiments where they put a bunch of extra guys on board to augment the crew, and that works for a week or so, maybe a couple of weeks, but eventually even that doesn't work very well, and that involves a lot of people hot bunking and stuff like that. Nobody likes that world.
Yeah.
But some parts are 24/7, other parts are just not.
Yeah. So if you're writing a novel with the Merchant Marine, that's one of those design choices. Is the engine room manned 24/7, or is it safe enough to leave unmanned at night?
Yeah, and I think another thing about starships and stuff like that is you conceivably. In the real world, you still take advantage of daylight. In the real world, if there's a bunch of people working and going about their business, they're going to be making so much noise that other people are going to have a hard time sleeping. I say this as somebody who was working the night shift, but was in berthing 1 with 100 of his favorite enlisted buddies. And I was doing 7 hours on, 5 hours off. And I couldn't really sleep in the afternoon. I could put on an MP3 player and listen to Beethoven's Pastoral, and it was nice, mellow music, and I could zone out and sort of catnap. And I do that for about 4 hours, where I was just sort of coming in and out of awareness. I do that for about 4 hours, and then my real honest to goodness sleeping happened between I think it was midnight and 5 a.m. if I remember correctly, is when I actually slept. But if your walls are soundproof and there isn't daylight for you to take advantage of because you're on a spacecraft, maybe you do actually do 24-hour ops.
The limitation there is it is sometimes easy. It's oftentimes easier to have everybody working the same schedule. So if I need an extra body to do this job, I don't have to wake somebody up or wait until they come on shift to do it. So it's
a math thing.
It's a manpower thing. Yeah.
Manpower thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, when we were working north of the Arctic Circle in the summer or in the winter, either all daylight or all dark, one or the other. It didn't, we still worked day work. Although once we were five time zones off to make sure the captain could get up at a reasonable hour of the ship's schedule to get a report off to Washington. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds very Hawaii like.
Yeah.
I mean, Hawaii is a weird place. Like, especially if you're dealing with like Pac Fleet or something like that, in that they all work really early in the morning. So because they're trying to maximize the amount of overlap with DC. And so everybody's start time is like 6:30 or 7:00 in the morning. It also means that they get off early enough to go surfing in the afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes. And I know I've met a few naval officers who were hardcore surfers.
Yeah. So it also allows the galley department to work of just a straight 8 hours, 12 hours, but it's, they're prepping food for just 3 meals. And then the few people that are on the 24-hour shift get a plate made up and left in the refrigerator.
Yeah, I remember when I visited you on board the one ship, there was plates just sitting out there with saran wrap over them.
Yes.
Yeah, on the carrier, they usually do mid-rats at midnight. And so I would sometimes have a weird enough, or in the small boys also, they do mid-rats. And I would sometimes have a weird enough schedule that I ended up eating 4 meals a day, not 3, because it was never clear when the next meal was going to be. So I better eat a meal just in case.
Yeah.
And so that's how it worked. Stephen Ross says he knew a guy who was a weather officer on a carrier and his quarters were near the bow under the catapult. Yeah.
Oh.
I've never been under the catapult, but then again, if you're on the 03 level, you really don't need to be under the catapult to be affected by the catapult firing. When the catapult fires, the catapult fires. I have had quarters right underneath the jet blast deflector on Carl Vinson. And the thing about the jet blast deflector is every second or third cycle, up and down cycle, it's a piece of the deck that's got water pipes running through it to cool it. And this piece of the deck levers up so that when the airplane goes to full afterburner, it's not setting people on fire behind it. And it deflects the blast into the air. And it's a big ass piece of deck. I mean, this thing is huge. And it's got a pretty beefy set of hydraulics. And every second or third time that thing cycles, it recharges the hydraulics. And that sounds like a chainsaw cutting through sheet metal. The first time I heard it, I thought that there had been an accident on the flight deck. It was, I couldn't imagine that any piece of gear in spec would sound like that. It's like, nope, that's just what it sounds like.
Yep.
And so I wore hearing protection in my quarters, not just because I wanted to sleep, but to protect my hearing. In fact, it wasn't sufficient for me. You couldn't sleep through it, even with earplugs in. It was just I was trying to cut down the amount of noise. And as a general rule, it's like, all right, this thing's going off. I'm going to go take a shower and get the hell out of my stateroom because I don't want to be here. So let's see. We were also going to talk about, let me close a bunch of tabs from when I was looking for Metro maps. We're also going to talk about cargo handling.
Yeah. Or do we want to do shipboard economy real quick?
Yeah, let's talk about shipboard economy.
Yeah.
So
I think we mentioned this a little bit last week, but maybe not. Maybe it was just when you and I were talking. In Star Trek, you never see them reaching for a wallet, even in the original series.
Yeah. And my guess is because it just, recognizes who they are, or maybe everything's free, but
yeah. I mean, on a merchant ship, the ship's store, if you want bottled water, candy, toothpaste, things like that, you go to the ship's store and hopefully they have what you want. And you just sign for it. And then at the end of the trip, they take it out of your pay.
Yeah, on a carrier or on a Navy ship, you pull out your wallet.
Yeah.
They have ATMs on the ship.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was kind of stunned because, my first time at sea was in 1999, November of 99. And I went to sea for 6 years on and off. The mental model that I had in my head was probably like appropriate for 1975 when I first got there. Like I was stunned. It's like, you guys have an ATM. It's like, of course we have an ATM. It's the 90s. It's the late 90s. It's practically the 21st century. Of course we have an ATM. If you wanted to get like soda and you were okay with what they had in the fountain, you just went to the wardroom, or like I would go to the wardroom because I was usually hanging with the officers. I'd just go to the wardroom and fill up. But the thing is, they would have Coke or Pepsi in their soda fountain. What they did not have was Mountain Dew or Dr. Pepper or anything that had more caffeine. This is in the days before 5-hour energy. These days I would go to sea with a bunch of 5-hour energy, or Monster energy drinks or anything like that. They didn't have any of that stuff. So basically it's like, if you really wanted caffeine, you drank Mountain Dew or you drank Navy coffee. I had resigned myself to the fact that I was just going to have to drink Navy coffee. And I was stunned. In my entire time at sea, I drank exactly 1 cup of honest to goodness Navy coffee. Now aboard Philippine Sea, so they also had machines, right? So I would go and get Code Red. Later on they had Code Red, but that was actually very rare. I'd go and get Mountain Dew out of a regular vending machine. I discovered at the very tail end on my very last trip to sea, on a carrier anyway, that you could go to the squadron and they would sell you cans of Coke out of their refrigerator in the squadron ready rooms, and they were cheaper than the machines. And so I found out, just stick your head in and say, hey, do you guys have Code Red? Do you guys have this? Do you guys have that? And they'd say, yeah, sure, come on in. Because it was an MWR thing for them. They'd use the money for morale and recreation purposes. But on Philippine Sea, they were getting ready to do inventory. So first they ran out of Mountain Dew. Then they ran out of Dr. Pepper. Then they ran out of, I can't remember if I went to Coke or I went straight to Frou Frou coffee from the Frou Frou coffee machine. They had like mocha coffee thing, and I was drinking that for a while. And then they ran out of that. And I drank my 1 cup of honest to goodness Navy coffee. And then they did the inventory and they restocked everything again. And I could get what I needed.
Yeah.
So I can quit anytime I want.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've gotten on a ship and I get on the ship. As soon as we get underway, or even, a few days before, if I'm not going to go ashore for some reason, take the wallet out, put it in my dresser someplace. And then the day before we're about to pull in, it's, damn it, I really ought to figure out where my wallet is. Because that would have my all my IDs and such with it.
Now, do you pay for your meals in
No.
That's part of your contract?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the unlicensed union, part of their contract is that the ships will be a single pot ship, not a 2-pot or 3-pot ship.
Which means they're eating the same food you are.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Navy ships vary. It depends on like DDGs are, and I think cruisers are also this way. It's the same group of food, although the officers chip in for extra stuff. But like the meals are prepped down below and brought up. I know that's how it works on DDG. They have a dumb waiter to do that. On carriers, it's a separate, because there's so many people and you've got so many different kitchens. It's actually a separate group of people making food for the officers. And I can't remember how it relates to what they're eating on the mess decks. I've only eaten on the mess decks of a carrier once.
Yeah. Now we do have guys either for themselves, or they'll chip in and we'll buy certain things for ourselves. You know, a couple of ships I've been on, we've got a crew that we really like coffee, or good coffee rather. So we'll go ashore and we'll pick up 4 or 5 pounds of Starbucks or something else.
It's funny that, have I told you the story about what I always did early on in my trip on the carrier, what I learned to do?
Bring coffee.
Well, so I later discovered that there's a reservist guide that said, bring a couple of pounds of coffee. There's always a guy who's a coffee snob, right? There's always one of those guys. You bring 2 bags of coffee and just say, hey, I brought this for everybody. And that guy will do whatever you need done. He will be your best buddy, and he will help you in whatever way you need. Now, my version of that is I was always doing ASW whenever I was on a carrier. And so I was in the what they call the X-ray module, because X-ray was the brevity code for the ASW commander. So I was in the X-ray module with those people. And usually about 10 o'clock at night, they go, a Nimitz class aircraft carrier actually has 2 ship stores. It's got the ship store, and then it's got something they call the 7-Eleven. The ship store is the place where you go and you buy like a hat or a jacket or a watch or something like that. The 7-Eleven specializes in snack food and stuff like that. And so they each have a little bit of the other, but as a general rule, 7-Eleven has a better selection of snack food, even though the ship store is actually like 3 times or 4 times the size. About 10 o'clock at night, they do a run to the 7-Eleven and they buy chips and stuff like that. And I would always say, hey, can I go along and help you carry stuff? I need to go down there anyway. Can I go along with you and help you carry stuff? So everybody would go and get stuff. And when it comes time to pay, I say, this one's on me. And I pull out my wallet and I buy all the chips for that night. We walk back in. Mr. Weave bought all the food for us. Now I'm golden.
Yeah.
Now I'm golden. And this was about, so there's actually a professional reason to do all this, right? Because I'm this scary guy with a notebook, right? And what makes me scary is the fact that I have a notebook and they don't know who I am, and they generally don't fully appreciate why I'm there. And one of the things I always had chambered and ready to fire is, I'm not here to evaluate you. I'm here to watch the exercise. I am not here to evaluate you. And there was always some point where at some point the enlisted guys are bitching about the officers, because the officers are generally not in the space, and they're bitching about the officers. And one of the junior enlisted guys will say, oh, we can't be bad mouthing the officers in front of the civilian. And it's like, yeah, he doesn't care. That was actually nice. I did Carl Vinson's Joint Task Force exercises back to back. So when I got back there were enough people that remembered me from the previous time. It's like, yeah, don't worry. He's cool. I know this guy. He's cool. Don't worry about him. But it was always about sort of getting people to the point where they were willing to talk with me about stuff, and getting them to the point where they were comfortable, right? That they didn't feel I wasn't. So sometimes I literally was looking over their shoulder, but it's because I cared what was on the screen. It wasn't because I cared what they were doing per se.
Yeah.
And so getting everybody at the point where they're willing to talk to the civilian with the notebook was important to get there as fast as possible. Just made everybody's lives easier to get there as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And that's one thing you never see on Star Trek, right? When at one point Tom Pope was doing bridges for Honorverse ships, he was doing layouts of bridges, and when I looked at it, and he had all the chairs, and they're marked with a number, and they've got the bridge crew position, and I said, "You don't have any extra chairs?" And he said, "Why would I need extra chairs?" And I said, for the people that are not normally on the bridge." "Well, why would there be those people?" "Well, okay, like if there's a visiting officer, he's going to get invited up to the bridge. You know, maybe the admiral's on board, but he's not really there in an official capacity, or maybe there's some guys with notebooks doing exercise analysis. The thing is, you know, when I was doing stuff, we could just cram extra people in the room, but if you need an acceleration chair to not die, you need to have extra acceleration chairs so that people don't die. So.
Yeah. Well, the other one you'd have is for the midshipmen.
Yeah. Officers under instruction.
Yeah.
Right?
Which means you have to have at least 2 chairs near. You have to be able to get 2 chairs near to every station.
Yeah.
You don't have, yeah. I mean, and depending upon how your layout is, you know, if everything's on a hard track, that extra chair can just be slid around to it. You know?
Yeah. It's really hard to make all that stuff work if you don't think about that stuff. I was really glad that Tom Pope got a chance to do a Tiger cruise with Andy Presby. I was a little bummed that Tom Pope only got to do a Tiger cruise from like Mayport to Norfolk.
Mm.
So it was like only 2 days, I think. Yeah. They took their time. It might have been 3. If you're a West Coast boat, there's a very good chance that you can go on board in Hawaii and be on board for like 10 days. Especially if you're going to Bremerton. You go on board in Hawaii and you're on board for like 8 or 10 days, something like that. But it was fun talking with Tom after he had done his Tiger cruise.
Yeah. I probably ought to sit down with him at some point and talk day-to-day ops on a merchant ship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, merchant ships have a lot smaller crews. There's a lot of automated stuff. You know, a lot of the stuff in a Navy ship is automated too. I mean, we're at the point now with gas turbines when the helm or the lee helm on the bridge grabs the throttles and shoves them forward, that's a direct link. And so the engines respond. I think somebody down there has to turn on extra turbines if you need extra turbines on, because they have 4 and frequently they only, the most fuel expensive thing you can do to a turbine is turn it on.
Yeah.
And so you don't turn them on if you don't need them. Under certain circumstances, you need them, and under certain circumstances, you're required to have the extras online. Like if you're doing an underway replenishment, anytime they call restricted maneuvering doctrine, you have to bring all your turbines online, because if you need power, you need it fast, and you don't have time to start the turbine. So you bring it online just in case. You have to maneuver.
Maybe Thursday or Sunday evening, you, me, Tom, Phil, and Shane Grease do a
could be,
yeah,
if we can get Phil in,
yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah. Shane's arm is retired U.S. Army, but he's doing some space Navy science fiction stuff.
So Olive asked a question about being a passenger on a merchant ship. I know that used to be a thing. It used to be a fairly cheap way to travel. My understanding is that it's no longer a cheap way to travel.
Correct. That's my understanding too. I haven't looked at the pricing. And even when it was a lot more common, I don't know how cheap it was.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to McPhee's Looking for a Ship. I think he talked about people that would use it instead of flying because they had plenty of time and they do it. And I think the issue, what I heard, that these days basically it costs about the same as a hotel room, but the minimum stay in this particular hotel is like 8 days, and so it gets expensive fast.
Yeah, I don't know about the pricing, but I mean, you can there's some writers that, you know, they go on the ship for a trip across the Pacific, 2-3 weeks. And, you know, they've got somebody they go down and eat the officer's mess. You know, there's always food out available of some sort, you know.
Yeah.
And there's no distractions, really. You know.
A friend of mine did he and his wife did a repositioning cruise.
Oh yeah, for a cruise ship.
Yeah, so cruise ships will move from one location to another location based upon the season. Yeah. And so like the cruise ships hang out in the Caribbean for a while, and then they go to the Mediterranean, and then they come back to the Caribbean, then they go to and they do it on a yearly cycle. And so if you're willing to have your cruise be across an ocean, and then you have to get on an airplane at some point to get home, or you have to get on an airplane to get there. They did one where I think they flew, if I remember correctly, they flew to England, hung out in Europe for a while, got in the cruise ship and rode it back. Yeah. And it was cheaper than a regular cruise.
Not surprised.
It was longer than a regular cruise too. It was like 2 weeks, but it was cheaper than a regular cruise.
Yeah. There's a couple of YouTube channels that talk about stuff like that. I'm not sure if, and I don't know her name. She does the channel's Cruising as Crew. And there's some other ones that I catch occasionally. I don't know how much staff they keep on board during the repositioning. I mean, they have to keep some, obviously, because they allow passengers on board.
I think actually it was pretty well staffed from what Steve was telling me. I think he said, from what he said to me, it was basically just like a regular cruise.
Okay.
It's just they didn't do all the port stops. You know, they had this long section in the middle where they didn't do any port stops because they were crossing an ocean.
Yeah. Sea days is what they refer to in cruising. I did one cruise to nowhere on the QE2 as a kid. You know, you go out and whatever entertainment you're going to have is going to be on the ship. You know, so, you know, and usually the weather is marginal because you're in between seasons.
Scott Voigt says repositioning is fully staffed, that he's taken a few and they're quite nice.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I mean, if it's cheaper and you don't mind being at sea, sounds great.
Yeah. I love being at sea.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right. So, all right. Cargo?
Yes. Cargo. Let's talk about cargo handling and stuff like that. I mean, cargo handling is one of those things we've talked about in the past, about how break bulk is really kind of what you think of as the old style cargo, where there's a big crane with a net full of wooden boxes that they're pulling out of the ship's hold. Yeah. That's, when was the last time they did that? 50s?
No.
70s?
80s.
Yeah. As a general rule, these days, everything's in a container, and if it isn't in a container, it's because it's something weird that doesn't fit in a container, or it's something like grain or oil, or
it's wheeled,
or it drives itself on and off.
Yeah.
And so and that just makes it really much easier. Early on in the show, we talked about this a bunch. I talked about The Box by I can't remember that. Mark Levin. I think
Mark Levinson.
Levinson. The Box is a fascinating thing, and the point that he makes is that the thing that makes it that makes cargo handling really expensive is every time you move from one mode of transportation to another mode of transportation, somebody has to do a thing. A person has to go in and physically manipulate the cargo. And in the old days, when you're loading stuff in a cargo hold, you're not just stacking things. You've got carpenters who are there building frames to hold things in place.
Yes,
and
that's
then
part of it.
Yeah, because you don't want the cargo to shift around. It breaks the cargo, and potentially in heavy weather, you don't want all of your cargo slamming up against one side of the ship. That's a really good way to, replicate the Poseidon Adventure.
Yeah.
And so you have to build up this framework, and then you have to tear it down when you get to the other side. And who knows how many people you have available when you get there, and it makes it really hard to predict how long it's going to take. But the one thing we do know, and I think you actually had some of the numbers on this, about how long it takes to load and on average, like load and unload versus travel.
Yeah. All right. So I looked this up before we did the last show as part of the notes that we have online. It was 6 days to load in New York City, 10.5 days to get to Germany, and then 4 days to unload.
And I'm sure the reason why it was 4 days to unload rather than 6 days to unload is because Germans are efficient.
They work 24 hours. In the stateside, they didn't work 24-hour shifts.
Ah.
Yeah.
I see.
And yeah, so this was a C2, so it's a World War II era or just post-war, 450 feet long.
Think Liberty ship.
A little bit bigger.
Yeah.
A little bit bigger.
Liberty ship-ish. I mean, more or less.
Yeah. So 5 cargo holds, designed in the 30s, 14,000 ton compared to the Ever Given, which was 200,000 tons.
Is that displacement or is that cargo tons?
I didn't write it down. Probably displacement.
You think displacement? Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, 200,000 would be awful big for cargo tons. But not everything's huge these days.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is, when you're talking about naval ships and somebody uses the word ton, ton is a pretty well-defined term for naval. Well, no. You have displacement tons and you have full load and you have, but I mean, basically, when you're talking about naval ships and you're talking about displacement, your options are metric ton, long ton, right? That's it, right?
Yeah.
When you start talking about ton with merchant ships, there's like 8 different versions, and the professionals generally don't just say ton. They're more specific than that, because they have to be, because there's lots of different options.
Yeah.
And most of them have to do with the amount of cargo that they can carry. And in some cases, it's about the volume of the cargo, not the actual mass of the cargo.
Yes. So when you're talking merchant ships, gross ton is internal volume of the entire ship. You get into net tonnage and you're talking cargo space.
Yeah.
And there was one of the things we had to do was, okay, so you take the gross tonnage and then you get you got like Panama tonnage, Suez tonnage, and you exclude certain areas. certain volumes for each of everything, for each different one, and they can be different.
Yeah.
So
It's crazy.
berthing areas are excluded. So the volume of berthing, the volume of the engine room may or may not be excluded under certain fees. So
The closest you get to that on the naval side is you talk about full load versus combat load versus this load versus that load, but it's using the same item of measurement, displacement tons, of either the metric or the non-metric variety. But it's a, okay, what are you including when you count them? What exactly are you counting? So there's a little conversation taking place here. Olive said, I feel sad sometimes that container ships pretty much did for Boston as a seaport. And not just Boston, New York City too. New York City used to be a big seaport. And you had factories inside New York City because the seaport was there. But when they built the container ships, the thing about containers is that in the old days, you had a truck. Go back far enough, it was a horse-drawn wagon. But you had a truck that pulled up to the pier, and dudes unloaded boxes and put them in the big cargo nets, and then they lifted them up and put them in the ship. And that's how that process worked. And so you wanted the truck to come from as close to the ship as possible to decrease your transportation costs. And so you had factories inside the city limits of New York City.
Yeah.
It's also worth pointing out that New York City as an actual legal entity only dates to like 1910. That it used to be the Bronx was a separate city, and they sort of collectively referred to it all as New York City, but that's sort of in the same way as it was more of a region. But that's a sidebar. When container ships came along, you no longer had the dudes. You just had a guy with a crane. Pick it up, take it off the truck, put it on the ship. Take it off the truck, take it off the ship, put it on a truck, take it off the truck, put it on a train, et cetera, et cetera. And because, note that I said train, because of that, trains became the primary way to feed stuff into ports. Trains and big semis became the primary way. You're not unloading boxes from the back of a truck anymore. You're moving these containers around, and you're using intermodal transport is about volume. And so in order to make that work, you need train tracks. And you weren't going to build train tracks to downtown Boston. And you weren't going to build train tracks to downtown New York. So instead of building train tracks to downtown New York, what you built instead was Elizabeth, New Jersey.
Yeah. Well, they do have train tracks. They had train tracks to Boston. I know that. Yeah,
they had some.
Yeah, they had some. You just weren't going to get the long trains that would make it really efficient.
And even if that had worked in the short term, it wasn't going to work in the long term because the ships just kept getting bigger.
Yeah.
And you very quickly would run into the situation like, do you really think you're going to have 100,000 ton container ship going into port in Boston? Or New York?
No place to put that many containers at once.
Yeah, you need warehousing for the containers. You the ship itself is massive. It got to the point where it was just easier to just build new. And this is actually one of the things that I find interesting about thinking about how you do that. What are the implications of this for science fiction? Well, you build all that stuff in orbit probably, right? And it makes a big difference as to what your technologies are to get stuff down to the ground. One of the things about the Honorverse in particular is countergravity is cheap, efficient, and they've had it for longer than we've had the printing press. And so you can bring loads from orbit down as a single load that are basically the size of a building. And if you remember back to the days of the rotary container ship discussion, there was something called the interstellar container, and there was also the planetary container. And the interstellar container was basically a 3-story building that you would land on a planet. You'd take it off the ship and you'd land the 3-story building on the planet. And then you'd pop out the planetary containers because very few people need a delivery in a 3-story building. They're more likely to need something that's like semi-trailer sized.
Yeah.
And so, but if you're thinking in terms of, you can easily envision a background where there really isn't a whole lot of interstellar trade. Because if I've got, like in Star Trek, how much stuff do we think they move between planets? They've got replicators that can deal with, I still think they need raw materials for replicators. And I'm going to do a show where I talk about how a replicator isn't the magic box that everybody thinks it is. And the implications of it's are not, they're pretty damn radical, but they're not as radical as people think they are.
Yeah.
But even so, even with a more restricted view of replicators, hey, you don't need you don't need to ship a whole lot of finished goods from one part of the galaxy to another.
Yeah. So back to that C2.
Yeah.
190. Let's see. 194,000 boxes, individual items.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they know where each and every one is, and they never lose any of them.
Yeah, except a pilferage, breakage.
Yeah, in fact, that's where I was going to go next. Stuff gets broken, and there's a certain amount of stuff that just kind of wanders off.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that people don't necessarily fully appreciate. If it's all locked in a container, right? Every time a guy holds a box, there's a chance that box is going to end up in the backseat of his car, or some of the contents of that box is going to end up, behind the building so that people can go through it if they think there's something valuable in it. You lock it all in a container, and the only action that you ever do with that thing is you lift the container off of one transportation mode and you put them on another. There's a lot fewer opportunities for pilferage.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to pilfer it, you either have to have it sitting there long enough with poor enough security, which is what they had just outside the port of Los Angeles a few years ago. The trains on the sidings going through the city itself, not inside the port, were sitting there long enough or going slow enough that people were climbing onto the trains and randomly opening containers to see what was in them, to steal them.
Yeah.
So,
Scott Boyd makes a comment about until the cargo goes over the side. So
yeah,
that is one thing about container ships. Container ships are actually designed to lose containers over the side.
Yeah.
In the same way that you want your car to crumple, because if the car crumples, it means that it takes all the force and you don't. And so if the way that containers are locked on board, if the weather is bad enough to knock containers over the side, you probably want the container to go over the side, because the alternative is the ship rolls, and that would be bad. And if you want to see why that's bad, go rent the Poseidon Adventure.
Yeah. So
let's see. You did a list of the different types of ships. So we got break bulk. Talk to me about Great Lake bulkers.
All right, so Great Lake bulkers, since at least the 70s and maybe earlier, but I haven't looked. They are self-unloading. So you have cargo holds that they have a pair of V's in them. Let's see. So I got a ship that goes this way.
Okay.
And I got a cargo hold that basically divvies up so you don't get fore and aft shifting of your cargo.
Okay.
And they load it with a conveyor belt ashore into the different cargo holds all at once. And they control it so that the ship goes down in a certain certain method. It goes like this, so they got to bring the bow down, and then they got to bring it down flat.
Okay.
And it doesn't end up flat because when you're going a certain speed, the way it shifts. So I'm not sure which way they'd load it. That's decky stuff that I haven't had to deal with those effects since college when I took ship stability. But so you've got your cargo holds. You start off like just one big hold going side to side. And then in the middle, you've got a V here and a V here. And they go down to what we call gates. And they're probably 4 foot by 4 foot. And you operate them to manually. There's a guy that stands there, and it goes onto a conveyor belt that runs the length of the ship on each side, goes into a hopper that then feeds into a bigger central hopper that then goes
brings it up to the deck.
Yeah, up to the deck, drops it onto a conveyor belt that's on a boom, and you can move the boom to over the unload area on the shore. And you raise it up and you just start pouring whatever cargo it is. Taconite, iron ore, coal, limestone.
Yeah, because a lot of the Great Lakes traffic, the bulk traffic on the Great Lakes was like taking iron to Pittsburgh sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so,
I worked 2
load
years
of iron ore, 27,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. As the saying goes. This actually highlights one of the things that I find really, really interesting. And which reminds me, I still haven't been to the merchant ship that's just north of me, and I better get my ass in gear if I want to do that before I leave. You would think that the Great Lakes are just like an ocean, and as a result, they're just like ocean ships, and that is like totally and completely not true.
Yeah.
Their proportions are different. Like I've never heard of anything like this Great Lake bulker out in the oceans. Have you? Does anybody do this?
I don't think so. And that's partially a size issue. No, actually, no, I do. There was the Energy Independence and its sister ship. I can't remember its name. They'd load coal in Norfolk and run it up to Boston and New York City.
Okay.
And because it was a relatively short run, and they were built roughly the same time, they were built in the 70s or 80s.
I bet they didn't go to the port of Boston. They went to something else that was nearby, right?
Yes.
So they went directly to their customer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is the sort of thing you see when you're trying to not have to run stuff through a port.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, she's a self-unloader, and amazingly enough, the crane was in the bow of the conveyor belt. This is from the ship spotting website.
Okay. We've talked previously about Lash and Sea Barge, which I just am absolutely totally enamored by them. I think there's so much potential from a science fiction standpoint regarding Lash and Sea Barge.
Yeah. And let me throw the YouTube video for that, because I found a.
Actually, I'll grab it and put it into the.
Okay.
Into the chat because if I put it in through there, I know it will show up.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, Sea Barge was unpowered, right? And Lash actually was powered because they were lighters.
Neither one was powered.
Oh, you needed a tug for both?
Yes.
So
Yes.
basically these are barges that carry the cargo, and then you unload the barge, which means
Yes.
a tug can take it. Like, this is potentially useful because you can like take it up a river or something like that.
You can take it up a river. You can drop it off in an undeveloped port. So when we went into Djibouti or Somalia, just drop it in the water, and they bring out a small boat with just enough horsepower to drag it in, and then they can unload and unload at their leisure. So whatever it was you're shipping doesn't require cranes ashore. Well, nothing bigger than what you'd have mounted on a truck.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
I really like the comment, the idea of those things. In the real world, though, neither one of them is still. None of them are in operation anymore, right?
Far as I know, they aren't.
Yeah, I think they were experiments that never went anywhere.
Yeah, the sea barges were scrapped 2020, just before 2019.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know about the last lashes. There was more lashes built than there were sea barges.
They're cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I like them a lot.
Yeah. So let's see. So
let's talk a little bit about places. If you want to read science fiction that has lots of merchant stuff, let's talk about that for a little bit.
Sure.
I think that's a good topic to finish on.
Okay. All right then.
So, have you read the Solar Clipper series?
I'm actually in one of the books.
Peter introduced me to the Solar Clipper series. What did you do in the book?
I was captain on one of the ships briefly.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
That must be a later book because I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's one of the Shaman series books.
Okay, I'm a few behind. I have a tendency I'll read a whole bunch of books in a series and get caught up, and then I'll sort of let a backlog build, and then I'll go and reread the entire thing, and I haven't done that yet. So I'm probably a few books behind. The Solar Clipper stuff is great. Let's see. I think Vada's War, which I know that you're aware of.
Yeah, I read the first 3 books. I haven't read the later ones. I
haven't read the second series. There's like a follow-on series. I haven't read any of those. I really like those books.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really like about them is that there's places where you see the you get a really good understanding of why you don't do certain things. Like, for instance, why you don't mount military-grade weapons on a civilian hull.
Yeah.
Because there's a point at which there's a privateer, privateer is probably the right word here, where they go in for what they think is routine maintenance, and they say, do you realize that the bow of your ship is about to fall off? Because there's a reason why you don't mount a gun like that on that ship. The bow's about to just fall off.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do to fix it.
Yeah. One of the sub-series from the Starship Mage by Glenn Stewart.
Okay.
Is all about a merchant ship with I guess they're technically a privateer, but it's it was originally it's a merchant ship, ex-Navy ship, auxiliary.
Okay.
He does a good job. The crew size is huge, like 200 people. But he explains it, why they have that many people on the ship. He actually has jobs for them.
That's good.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah. So I think merchant ships, but mostly because I'm so familiar with them, I'm a lot more skittish, I guess, or a lot more unforgiving when, oh, I got this huge crew. What does this crew do? you know,
Yeah.
you know. So you need to have something to do. A passenger ship. Oh yeah, you got all these people, waiters and stewards and things like that. Yeah, that eats up an awful lot of people. But a cargo ship, 20 to 50, depending upon what you give it for a tech.
Yeah, and another good background, I think, is the Alliance Union universe from CJ Cherry.
Yep, families.
Where her explanation is that for relatively large crews is the voyages all take a really long time and they're all family run. And so you're essentially, it's a small town in space, right? You have to watch the kids. Some of your quote unquote crew was kids. You have to watch the kids. You have to educate the kids. You have to do all the other stuff that you have to do in a small town, because there is no going ashore, because journeys between star systems could be 6 months or more. Yeah. Now, the part I don't understand about CJ Cherry's universe is explain to me exactly what that cargo is again.
Yeah. The Aidens apparently seems to be the same way.
Explain to me exactly what cargo is so valuable that you'd still be willing to pay for it if it took you 6 months. Well, it's 6 months of ship time. It's more than that of station time. So it's like, it's not like if you had to order something from Amazon and you weren't going to get it for 3 years, how much do you think you'd be using Amazon?
Yeah.
But I love her universe.
Yes. Yeah.
I also love the Liaden series by Steve Miller and Sharon Lee. Yeah. But I also have some concerns. All the trade in that universe seems very boutique.
Yes. Yeah. Venice versus post World War II.
Yes. Yeah. People talk about Venice as being this great merchant port. The amount of actual trade that went through it, like the spice trade. I remember reading somewhere that the spice trade was a couple of ships a year.
Well, excuse me. Yeah. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about with David, I guess, is merchant ships in the Honorverse are probably easily a 6-month trip. Multiple star systems, though.
Yeah, I mean, some of them can be, but I think they're doing routes. There might be some that are just back and forth, right? There might be some that are back and forth. Like my guess is things like grain haulers are probably just back and forth, and they may go back empty. But other things, I think they actually follow a route. They may not just be back and forth.
Yeah, and I suspect that we know they have family ships, family-owned ships. And even if they're not family-owned, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point you're allowed to bring your family with you. If you're unlicensed and you've been with the company for a while, and you're not going into a hostile area like Silesia, you can bring your wife or spouse rather, and kid or kids, and or you're going to have a lot of time off because that's one of the things with the merchant marine is Well, you need time off, and there really isn't a sea duty, shore duty rotation like you see with the Navy, the modern Navy.
Yeah.
So, and
Instead, you just get vacation for 4 months.
Yeah. And part of that is, they don't have any reason to. Most of the people, there's not much you can do in the office. They can slot you in easily.
Yeah.
Even if you wanted to work, you just you end up with possible conflicts of interest. You're approving stuff if you're in purchasing, you're approving stuff you ordered for your ship. You might come in and help with crewing, especially if it's for another ship, another part of the ship's, another division. You might do engineering, to help with that. But there's an awful lot of people that's just like, what are we going to do with you?
Yeah.
So there's some, but not a lot. So they basically don't even count on it. So
this is an infinitely fascinating topic.
Yes.
And Star Trek has the family-owned ships. I understand where the family-owned ships come in CJ Cherry's universe.
Yeah.
I don't understand where they come from in Star Trek. And I don't understand where they come from in the Honorverse, because while shipping in terms of cost per mile may be, interstellar travel is the cheapest form of transportation ever in terms of cost per mile. David says that on multiple occasions. It's still a huge capital investment for a 4 million ton freighter.
Right.
And I don't think you just go to the local Navy Federal and take out a loan for that.
No. But I could very easily see the government wanting to, and this is really, it would be a David question, that we don't want to have a small number of large shipping companies. We want diversity of our cargo haulers. So,
yeah,
we will loan you the ship and you pay for it over time. But, and if you fail financially, we just take the ship back.
That could be.
Yeah.
We don't have any indication in Star Trek as to how those family-owned ships come about. In CJ Cherry's universe, basically they're the descendant of the original crew, and the original crew basically just didn't give the ship back.
Yes.
And as a practical matter, when you're going off on a 5-year voyage, and there's no real way to enforce giving the ship back. And one of the other things that happened is a lot of those ships didn't originally have an FTL drive. They were originally a slower than light ship, which begs the question once again, what exactly was the cargo they were carrying that was worth sending at slower than light speeds between star systems? I suspect that if CJ Cherry was here, the answer was probably something more along the lines of subsidized ships that were supporting star stations. And so it was the trading network sort of was an emergent phenomena that occurred over time, that they didn't really set out to be merchant ships. They were more like naval auxiliaries where the crew eventually became merchanters and stole the ships, and everybody was okay with it because nobody could do anything about it, and it was still fulfilling a need. I suspect.
The ships are going to last 200, 300 years. So
maybe that's how that works. So, I think I've been keeping a pretty good handle on what was being said in the comments. Let me take a quick look to see if there's anything that I missed that I want to respond to. Because I think we're at the 90-minute mark. We should probably declare victory soon. Wright at one point waxed poetic about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and the mid-rats.
Yep.
I've had one or two of those myself.
Yep.
I do know there are residential cruise ships. Randy Cassingham, the guy who does the This Is True list, is currently on. He's moved to sea. He and his wife are on a residential cruise ship, and he's renting office space. They've got like an open office area, and then they've got separate like workspaces. And he can work from anywhere, so he decided he's going to work from the ocean for a while.
Yeah.
And if I could work from anywhere, I would seriously consider doing something like that.
Yeah.
If I could make it work. I know about some software engineer who had I think it was 3 years for $100,000, if I remember correctly, and he was just going to work at sea. So
yeah,
I could seriously see doing that.
Yeah. So Wright's thing about the Algol class, the SL7 class. I got on a couple of them over the years. I was never crew.
Okay.
I did surveys and inspections on them at one point. I think they're finally starting to get rid of them. I'd have to check though.
Okay.
Yeah. But they're at getting close to 50 years. And big old steamships, not a lot of people know how to run steam anymore. Conventional steam, that is. So.
Oh yeah, those things. I'm taking a look at one.
Yeah.
The nice big helo deck right in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. I have to take a look at that. That's not a ship.
Yeah. Have you got a photo, or do I need to drop one?
Let me go. And okay, share screen. There we go.
Okay. All right. Then,
Make
yeah.
it a little smaller to make it a little bigger, because that's the way this works. So that's a nice looking ship.
Yep.
That's a very nice looking ship.
Yep. A lot of container space on the upper deck. And which is what that crane is for.
Okay.
Yeah. So
all right. I'm going to have to pull the thread on those. Those look like they could be potentially interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Going back to the comments. Scott Voigt made the comment, LCS is way too automated, works okay when it works, not nearly enough people to fix everything. Yeah, that's a problem in two ways. One is if you had to really fix stuff at sea, you were hard pressed. And the other one is because you weren't doing your own routine maintenance. The idea was you pull in the port and a bunch of people would swarm on board. Well, how do you figure out where stuff is to do damage control? The idea is that, you do your own maintenance on it and you know where all the valves are, et cetera, because you've done the maintenance on them. If you're not doing the maintenance on it, you don't know where that stuff is.
Yeah.
That's one of the complaints I've heard about them.
Yeah.
Coffee is the life of a sailor. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're back to the beginning.
Okay.
So I think it's probably a good time to declare victory. What do you think, Peter?
Sure. We can talk later, over next weekend, and see if there's anything else we want to add for a future episode.
That's true. We can always do another one. I do want to do a deep dive on Vada's War at some point because it's a very interesting series, and there's a few interesting things buried in there that I liked a lot. But I have to reread it. It's been a while.
Yeah, I've got to probably get them in Kindle format to have time to read them. So
yeah, I listen to the audiobooks, so I need to see if I've even got them in Kindle format.
Well, that's the other possibilities. I can renew my Audible. So
all right. I think with that, let's go ahead and declare victory. And so, as usual, I am honored by the fact that we have all these people who decided that the best thing they can do on a Friday night is to listen to me, and in this case, also Peter, talk about these things.
Yep.
It's Saturday.
You're right. It is Saturday. Okay, on Saturday night, I'm if anything, that makes it even more amazing that you guys are all willing to just sort of hang out here, and I do appreciate that fact. And thank you very much for doing it. I am honored. And with that in mind, we'll see you not next week, not the week after, but the week after that, probably.
Okay.